Hello and welcome to Rediscovering Childhood, a podcast that brings you lots of practical information to help you become a more conscious parent. This podcast is brought to you by Discovery Playtime, an Irish business that provides high-quality educational and sensory toys to help your children develop skills through play. Visit discoveryplaytime.ie or download the app to get inspired. Hello and welcome to another episode of Rediscovering Childhood. I'm here with Shannon today.
Hello.
And we welcome an art therapist, Ella. Hello, welcome to the pod.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No problem. Art therapy is something that I'm very interested in. And when I did primary school teaching in college, I specialised in art and I found it incredibly powerful, the things you can achieve in regards to children and their well-being and their development. And it's just through art, it's just as simple as... So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Me too.
So would you like to tell us why art therapy?
Why art therapy? That's a really good question. So I admittedly hadn't heard of art therapy when I was in school. There's no degree in art therapy really in Ireland, or there wasn't when I started out. So I originally didn't think I would be a good art therapist when I first heard about it. I didn't think I'd be a therapist at all. That just wasn't my thing. I first went to art college and studied design purely because I felt I needed a degree and my family were pushing me towards it. So against my will a little bit, I went to college and had a great time, but afterwards was very clear on the fact that I didn't want to be an artist or to pursue that idea. So I just worked for years and volunteered. I did a lot of work with the Scouts in Donnybrook, and I got a chance to be very creative there, which was great, and a lot of work with the kiddies. And I also volunteered out in Tala Hospital for a couple of years. I used to go up every week and do art with kids in the waiting room, which was kind of eye-opening. They had a full-time art therapist there, and it was my first experience actually meeting an art therapist. And seeing how she worked and hearing about her work was really inspiring. So I decided maybe I would try that route. So I tentatively did. Now, in the background of all of this, I've had my own experience with therapy. And I think for anyone doing therapy with children, it's important to do your own process. If you don't do that, you're just going to be bringing up your own stuff all the time. And that's just not useful. So that was always in the back of my mind. And I also had the opportunity to do my own art therapy as well, which was really interesting to be the client and now to be the therapist is a really lovely dynamic to try. So that was kind of my lead into art therapy.
And you said when you were with the Scouts, you got to be creative.
Yes.
What does being creative really mean? Because I come across a lot of especially parents saying, oh, I'm not creative, I can't do activities with my children because I'm not creative, I can't do art. And it's that conception of art has to be that perfect picture coloured inside the lines, but it's not that. What's being creative? What's creativity?
Absolutely, I agree, it's not that. And I suppose coming from an art background, everything was about the finished piece and the aesthetic of it. And art therapy is the complete opposite. You throw out the rule book. It's not about what you're making. It's the why and the how.
It's the process.
Exactly. The how it makes you feel, you know, what you're expressing. It's not something you need to hang up on a wall. In fact, often, you know, after you've done a process, you might not want to look at that piece. It's too difficult, or, you know, you put a lot of work into it and maybe it's just so heavy that it needs to be put away. Or sometimes, you know, clients just want to destroy their pieces because it's too much. So I think being creative is different for everyone. You know, I found within the Scouts, I was able to bring ideas like doing murals or mosaics or doing some messy play. I could bring in all the time. And now this would have been pre-training. So at that point, I wasn't doing it on a therapeutic basis. It was more just about play and fun. And obviously I've developed that over the years. But I think for parents, it's so important to be creative in whatever form is comfortable for them. Because if they're not comfortable, the child's not comfortable. So creativity can be baking, you know. splashing around some eggs and milk and flour and making a little bit of a mess, or making Play-Doh. You know, those are simple things that aren't painting a pretty picture. You know, obviously there's getting the paints out and doing a bit of finger painting or some chalks on a blackboard or on the ground. I think that it's important for each of us to find our own version of creativity and use that as best we can with our children.
Yeah. What happens in an art therapy session?
Okay, so if a child is coming to me for art therapy, you know, I obviously do an intake and a parental consultation to begin with to get a feel for what's going on and the child's background. And then a child would come in and we try to keep sessions consistent. So it would be the same time, same day each week until we need to finish. They're 45 minutes long. So when they come in for the first session, they can bring someone with them. You know, sometimes I have the whole family coming in or the family pet. I've had some dogs in sessions, which is always fun. Or just one parent to come in for the first couple if they need that. It's different for every child and I adapt, you know, where is necessary. But they'll come in and I'll give them a tour of the room and show them what I have. Because obviously I do play therapy and Santre play therapy as well as art therapy. So there's a lot in my space. So they will, you know, look around. I'll show them what I have and explain where everything is. And essentially say to them, you know, within this room, there's not many rules apart from let's try to keep each other safe and let's try not to break anything, but that happens. So it's okay if it does. So those are the main things. And you have to understand for a child, that's very rare. I mean, if they're going into school, there's much more rules than that. And often at home, there's more rules than that. So there's a big sense of autonomy as soon as a child hears that. And I very much express to them that they are in charge of the space, that it's important that they're deciding what we do, when we do it and how within those boundaries. So they know that they have their time. I'm letting them know how much we have left. We've got the clock on the wall they can keep an eye on. But while they're there, it's their time. So it's really up to them how they want to use that. I work very non-directly, especially at the beginning. So it's important for the child to take charge and decide what they want to do. And I often have parents saying, well, how are you going to work on this particular issue if, you know, the child's just coming in and making what they want? But inevitably, that's the best way to do it because whatever needs to come up comes up in the session. Do you know? And then I can be a little bit more direct where necessary and maybe lead them into different ways of doing things that might help or go through a particular process. But they need to bring that up themselves. That's so important.
So art is just a form of communication and then you know how to listen to that language.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to consider, firstly, I mean, if you go as far back as cave drawings, there was a story told. You know, we can look at them now and say, okay, we can see exactly what they did during the day, how they got their food, what they did, where they slept. You know, it's telling an entire story. We have no words put with those images, but we can tell that story. It's very similar with a child. And you also have to understand that, you know, a lot of us know that as babies, we can communicate what we need or want without words. You know, we don't need to put pressure on a child verbalizing their emotions or their feelings all the time because sometimes they don't understand them or sometimes it's just too much to say. So what I'm doing is facilitating them to express themselves without having to verbalize things. You know, it's not like the movies where they come in and sit on a couch or lie on a couch opposite me and tell me all their issues. I could imagine for any adult that would be overwhelming, but for a child, that's just too much. So the idea with the art is, and the play as well, it just takes the pressure off the words, really, because we can really just get jumbled up in them and lost. And I often find in children, they'll tell you one thing, but they're feeling another. So that's where the art comes in.
And who is art therapy for?
Anyone. So again, it's not about the aesthetics. So, you know, I have to do a lot of work, especially if I'm working with teens or adults, around not putting pressure on themselves to make something beautiful or something that they want to put on their fridge. But it's about the process. So if anyone is willing to try that or, attempt that type of therapy, then it's for them.
And how can emotions come up in your sessions? Like, for example, anger or stress or anxiety. What ways would kids express that emotion through art?
I mean, I will say it's different for everyone. For one example, I would often see things like a volcano made when there's a lot of anger. And whether that's out of clay or with paint, and it's often quite messy. A lot of kids are coming with kind of sensory issues, so it takes a while to get into the messy stuff, but usually that's the really unconscious stuff. It's not, it's not like that Freudian film stuff you see where they hold up an image in a psychiatry ward and they say, "What is this?" And you have to say, "Oh, that's a flying bird." It's not like that at all, right? So, like, when I look at a volcano, I might think one thing, but you might think the complete opposite. So it's different for everyone. So it's important that I'm building up the relationship with the clients so that I can understand what each image and what each movement and how, they're using the materials and what is that saying about them rather than my own interpretation. So to a certain extent, I'm saying, okay, so usually when I see this, it's connected to anger, but it might be different for the child. So I have to be very in tune with that. But generally speaking, if a child is overwhelmed, they need a lot of mess. They need to kind of work through that. And it can start off being very difficult. And you just have to be really patient with that. So there's no, it'd be great if I had a book that said, this image means this.
Yeah.
And this colour means that. And that's a lovely concept, but it's not the reality, sadly. So I'm really kind of trying to absorb everything that's happening in the room. Even the pressure that's being put on the marker that's being used and what's that saying, So you're kind of reading it all as, body language and movement and how they're using materials and what they're creating and the mess they're making and whether they can have the paint on their hands or do they need to run in and wash them every few minutes. It's all telling me a story, really.
Yeah. How could we bring that into the classroom? Because I think the classroom is a wonderful space if we use it correctly.
Yeah.
So how can we bring a bit more of that self-expression and art therapy into the classroom, into the everyday life? That's not, now it's time for art, we're going to draw that beautiful picture. Because I think that's where it comes from, that conception of art has to be perfect and beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's what we've grown up with. And I'm not good at art. But we're all good at art and expressing ourselves if we try, and it takes practice because of that fear of it's not going to look great. So what are the things our teachers could do in the classroom to take a little bit of that art therapy into their everyday to help their children's well-being, for example?
Even art wellness, because I'm aware that within a classroom space, it's hard to make it therapeutic, and I don't want to put that pressure on any teacher. I don't expect anyone to be a psychotherapist with 30 kids in front of them. Like I do group work sometimes, but like it's a whole different kettle of fish, whereas one-on-one you can kind of handle. I think that being creative and again making a mess for children, especially in primary school age, is so important because you have to consider the lack of autonomy that is often happening in schools throughout the day and even at homes. They have so little choice with what they're doing and when within the school day, obviously for many different reasons, and it makes sense and it's necessary in a lot of ways. But I think the focus needs to be to give some of that autonomy back. And I think a great way to do that is to loosen some boundaries. I'm aware that often in classrooms there's carpets and there's furniture that you don't want to wreck. And, teachers got her clothes on, she doesn't want to wreck them, and they have their uniform or their clothes on. You don't want them covered either. But to be able to really immerse yourself in the making process, you need to throw all those rules out the door and let loose a little bit. And I think the best way for any teacher to do that is to lead by example. And I think that can be the hardest thing. As an adult, especially being in charge of kids, it's hard to let go a little bit, and I think that that's important. So I think if teachers willing to make a mess and lead by example, then the kids can follow. And that can be something as simple as finger painting. You know, getting a little bit of paint on your hands and fingers. Yeah, it's going to end up on the table and on your clothes and probably on the floor. And
but they can wash it as well as part of the
Exactly.
game. They'd love that.
Exactly. And you know, try not to put too much emphasis on the cleaning up, but just the enjoyment of the making of the mess. And just to sit in that for a little while, because we don't get to do that. You know, you hear all these tidy up songs and they're brilliant, and obviously
Where's
children
the make a
need to
mess
learn
song?
that. Yeah, exactly. Like, let's make a mess. And you know, even in my training, it took me a while to become comfortable with that. I think we're just it's like built into us at this point that like you know, you have to present yourself a certain way, and you can't have paint behind your ear and glitter in your hair, and you know, you have to be quite careful in a lot of cases. And I think it's really beneficial for children just to take back some of those layers, to peel them back and just allow yourself to be in the mess a little bit, but in a comfortable, controlled way, so that it's not overwhelming.
One step at a time.
Exactly, because I'm finding that so many children are coming in and they're being described as having sensory issues, and they're just so uncomfortable with mess and the idea of it. And I just wonder what we're doing that they're getting to that point. But the good news is that you can definitely kind of rewind a little bit and go back and kind of go, you know, it's okay. It's okay to make a little bit of a mess and to sit in that. And I think that once kids are given that permission, a lot of comfort comes. And then with that, a lot of happiness.
Yeah. Do you think those sensory issues can come sometimes for the lack of allowance, really, to make a mess?
Lack of experience as well, probably.
Yeah, and that restriction. Yeah.
Because every child should do sensory play, not just children with additional needs.
Yeah.
Every child needs that sensory input. Every single child, whether they ask for it or not.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's important to work through the issue, and it's okay to discover different senses and maybe ones that you don't love, but to play with that.
Yeah. What are the actual specific benefits of art and creativity and messy play? How does that help children develop skills, or what skills?
Well, I mean, obviously it's helping fine motor skills, and there's a lot of very basic skills, but generally in my work, you know, children are coming for different issues, whether it's grief, trauma, anxiety, you know, eating disorders. I won't name them all, but you can use art to work through all of those depending on the child. You know, obviously if it suits them and we've built up the right relationship and they can trust me, then we can explore their issues through art and creativity. And inevitably, you know, art is so connected to the unconscious. You know, you can really just switch off and let your body create something. And it's an expression. You know, again, it's a story. You know, sometimes children are coming into me and they're not even aware what they're expressing in their artwork, but I can see exactly what's going on. And then, you know, the really useful part is then I can relay it to a certain extent to the parents and go, okay, you know, this is what we need to do outside of here. Like, when you go home, I want you to try talking to them this way, or be aware of this and keep an eye on that. And sometimes it can tell us things that we mightn't have realised otherwise.
You mentioned earlier you're also a play therapist as well.
Yeah.
What would you say would be the main difference between art therapy and play therapy? Like, if you were thinking of either or for your child, what way would you suggest of going and how to think of it, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when I first trained as an art therapist, the masters that I did was very straight with keeping, you know, a line between play therapy and art therapy. In my experience, there's no line. They really just bleed into each other. They are very much the same. I mean, I know within play therapy, there is a lot of art therapy training and clay therapy training. And I know within art therapy, you're also doing sand tray play therapy. And, you know, the crossovers are so much. So I admittedly wish in Ireland that they were more connected, because it makes sense. But I think that other people might disagree with me. But just my line of work, I've just found that the two go hand in hand. I call myself an art therapist because that's my postgraduate and my master's are in art therapy. That's my original background, and all my other trainings have been smaller and shorter in comparison. So that's why I go with that. Sometimes you have children that just love art. So, getting them in the door is easier when they feel like it's art. Whereas sometimes when they hear play, it mightn't be as exciting. And obviously there's the reverse of that they don't like art, but they love play. So you can kind of tweak it depending on who's coming. And I do find with teenagers, art therapy is an easier concept to want to attempt than play therapy. Obviously it's a really difficult time, and the last thing you want to be associated with is a child, and you associate play with a child. So I think as teenagers, art therapy is much more doable for them. It's more digestible, and generally I find they do much more art than they do play.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would you do any family bonding using art or play therapy?
I do some where necessary. So I do work very closely with parents anyway. I meet with parents every 6 sessions if the child's coming to me, and then I might suggest that they either do their own process outside of my art therapy space, or that I do some sessions with them. But the parents have to be on board and doing their own work for the work to work, really, so it's important that I'm really communicating with them and telling them what's going to benefit their child going forward, or often expressing to them things that maybe they're not aware of, or that the child might not be capable of telling them themselves or willing to tell them as well. So, I'm kind of an advocate for their child, and I get the responsibility of expressing to them things that their child might need or want that they might not be aware of.
Do you know more? I just find the subconscious mind absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
So would you like to talk a little more about that?
Well, so, I feel like we could talk for hours about that, but I think that the real sweet spot for both play and art therapy is the unconscious. And that's where the best stuff comes out. It's a little bit like...
Is unconscious and subconscious the same thing?
Yeah, pretty... Oh, sorry, that was me. Yes.
Okay.
So they're very much the same thing. There's a big crossover, but I usually use the word unconscious, and I'm not really sure it's the first one that comes to mind. But I suppose it's it's not conscious, subconscious, unconscious. You're not consciously doing something, And again, with the art, the idea is that it takes you out of that side of the brain, that the thinking side, and it's more the creative side, and that side is the more unconscious side. It's very much linked to your dreams, for instance. You have a lot of people that love telling you their dreams, and they're wondering oh, what does that mean? You have to consider that that's a lot of image-based information. And now often your dreams are just a way of working through the day or the week that you've had, and it can come out a little bit weird, but in reality, a lot of it's just metaphor, and it all makes a lot of sense if you piece it together. And art can work very much in that way. So if you are able to turn off the side of your brain that's focused on the thinking and the aesthetics and dive into the unconscious, that's where the really good, sticky, ooey gooey stuff is, that isn't necessarily easy to understand on your own, I can't remember what your question was.
Yeah, no.
You answered it. It's fine.
I did, okay.
So how could I, if I was on my own at home, how can I access that unconscious mind? What do I do to get started?
So, there's a lot of different activities you can do to get yourself into it. Now, I will say that, doing art on your own can be a huge release, and it's really useful. But there is a subtle difference between doing it with a trained art therapist and doing it on your own. But I do think being, again, creative and using art in your day-to-day life is really useful and important. So one thing you could do is to just get a big piece of paper and scribble. Scribble like no one's watching. Just scribble and scribble and scribble, and add some more colours if you want. And, You don't even have to look at the page, just let it out.
That makes my journaling a lot easier.
If you're saying that, my body's like coiling as you're saying that. I'm like, what do you mean scribble on the page?
Right?
It's so weird.
Isn't it funny though? But I think that's embedded in us in a lot of ways. Like even from a school age, from junior infants, it's about the aesthetic. Like, oh, at Christmas we're going to make Santa coming out of the chimney, and this is, I've made an example and you have to copy this and it needs to look like this. Like, when I think of that, I even have the pressure of, oh God, it's not going to look the way the teacher's done it. And like, oh no, I'm really worried about it now. And mine's not as good as the person beside me. And, there's a whole dialogue going already. You have to throw that out the window. You have to really push yourself to say, I'm not going to focus on this finished piece and this aesthetic. I can scribble and scribble and scribble, and it can make me feel uncomfortable, but I can sit in that. And then I can put that aside and then I can do something else. And maybe that's more comfortable. So, I think starting with the scribble is just a really good way of taking you out of that side of the brain and going, it's not important that I create something that I want to look at after. It's actually more important that I create something without the thinking part and just the doing. And you'll find that you feel it in your body. Like you mentioned, doing the scribbling feels a little bit uncomfortable. Like often there's like a tightness, like kind of like, oh, I really don't want to do this. I'm kind of like, I'm freezing up. This is not a comfortable space. Like even you're kind of moving in your seat and you're going, oh no, this isn't nice. What is that? What is that feeling? Where is that coming from? I think that's the basis of doing this kind of work, is trying out and going against the idea that has been placed on us since we were teeny tiny, on all of us. I don't think anyone's avoided that,
No, definitely not. And then so that'd be me doing it at home. But then if we have a therapist, then they can kind of analyse that work.
I suppose I don't want to say the word
like
analyse, right? Just purely because I wouldn't want a client to ever.
It sounds very
feel
judgy.
Like,
yeah.
Because it's not like there's no judgment in the room. I don't think that's useful.
We can read that word.
Yeah, and I suppose maybe interpret or understand it for them. And, I find with kind of older kids or adults, you can ask them about it. It can be a little bit more direct and you can say, oh, I could see that you were squirming a little bit while you were making that, or you looked a little bit uncomfortable, or, you took a really deep breath in. Like, how was that feeling in your body? And you can kind of go from there. And obviously, there's different activities that you can do then to try and release some of that feeling, or to try and calm yourself or recenter yourself or refocus, whatever it is that the client needs. But again, it's important to kind of do those little things to get you into the unconscious that we spoke about.
And those questions, so what I've heard is don't ask children, when children are drawing or expressing themselves through art, don't ask them, what is that? What are you drawing? What should we ask instead? And why it's not great to ask that question.
Yeah, well, I suppose, like, again, and it's different if it was like in a classroom or at home or in a therapeutic setting. Like I'd have very particular questions I would ask, and I'd be very careful about the words I use. And I love like an open-ended question, right? But I also am very aware that I don't want to give any preconceived notions to the client or to the child. I don't want to say, oh, you've drawn a house. I mean, that might not be a house for them. So, you have to be very careful about what you're saying. So I think, if you're taking it from a parent's point of view and a child is at home drawing, I think just showing an interest is really important. So saying something like, oh, I see you're drawing, instead of, oh, what are you drawing, might be a little bit less confrontational as well, because it just opens it up for a child to go, yes, I am drawing. This is what I'm drawing. And you can say, oh, okay, that's what you're drawing. And I see that you chose red, or I see that you chose, instead point out the obvious, and, instead of kind of drilling them. Like you'll often find with kids, I'll always say to parents when they come out of sessions, I have a no ask policy, which is don't ask them what happens in the session. And I can, like, parents physically squirm at the idea of that, and I totally understand it. But I have to express to them that the less you ask, the more information you get. It's like when they get in the car after school and you immediately go, how's your day? What'd you do? And they're like, ugh, nothing. You know, and they're like, "What? I don't know. You know, why are you asking me? Like, get off my back," right? Whereas if you were to kind of sit there and say, "Oh, you were in school all day. It's so great to see you," they'd probably eventually kind of go, "You know what I did today? I'll tell you. Like, I did this," and you can be like, "Oh my God, that's amazing." You know, so I find that the less you ask often, the more information you get, or the information that they're willing to share as well.
Yeah.
You know.
How can we help children build their self-esteem?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Using
through art.
art.
I think that, again, I wouldn't want to give like any preconceived notions to a child, but I think if a child is proud of something that they've created, that you need to mirror that back to them. And I think the factual praise is my favorite thing in the world. I think that giving factual praise to a child, I mean, if you have to consider a child that might be going to sessions or, you know, just in the world that isn't feeling great about themselves or finds it hard to take a compliment or is quite hard on themselves, factual praise is much harder to pull apart. So for instance, if your child is drawing something, you're like, "Oh my God, that's amazing. That's the best giraffe I've ever seen. I think you're just the best drawer in the world. Like, I think you're a true artist." As a child, I can go, "Well, that's not true. How can you say that this is the best giraffe in the world? What are you comparing this to? And how can you say that I'm the best artist? Like, I'm not Picasso. I'm not famous. I'm not making millions. There's no proof. Where's the proof in this pudding, right?"
You're lying to me.
Exactly. And a child that's not feeling great about themselves is automatically going to go there. Understandably, we do it as adults as well. So giving factual praise is far more beneficial. So if, for instance, they've drawn a giraffe, saying something really simple like, "You've drawn a giraffe. You look like you really enjoyed drawing that. You had a big smile on your face. That's a fact." I can't go, "No, I wasn't." "Oh yeah, no, I was smiling." "Okay, yeah, no, I enjoyed that. And yeah, I did. Okay, I drew that giraffe. Yeah, that's fine." You know, like it's much harder to pull that apart. So I think just being present and, you know, showing an interest and then kind of backing it up with a bit of factual praise is just a really nice environment for a child. And I think any chance we get to do that, the better.
It's almost like tricking them into a compliment. It's like, I'm not ready to take a compliment, but if you tell me something I can't, I'm like, "Oh wait, okay, yeah, sure."
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you can even like try it with your friends. You know, it just sticks different. It really does.
It really, yeah.
Yeah. And like, even if you think about it now, like different things that you've said over the last couple of days, you could easily pick a lot of them apart. But if you were a bit more factual, it sticks a bit more, it resonates a bit more, you know, like I'm willing to take that on because I can't pick that apart as easily. And, you know, for a child that's maybe not feeling great about themselves and picking themselves apart, it's very easy to pick anything apart that's even remotely a compliment towards them. So you have to kind of fight against that a little bit and prove them wrong.
Yeah.
Because they are amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I honestly think this is gold. This information is gold, and it's so important as parents to create that habit of first noticing when we're saying, "Well done, you're the best, that's amazing," because we all do that all the time because we want to make them feel happy without knowing they're like, "You're lying to me.
Get away from me."
Yeah. And listen, we all do it. Like I do it as a parent. Did you know?
Yeah.
It is inevitable. You just slip into it. I think even today I said, you know, "Oh my God, you are just amazing. You know, I just want to squish your face. You're amazing." And like, I think that that's perfectly normal, and that's fine. Like, I'm not saying to parents,
No, you can still do that, but also start creating that habit of noticing. You know, "Oh, you picked so many colors," or you worked so hard on doing this.
Yeah, just a little bit of a dialogue. And I always say to parents, like, say it real nonchalantly. Do you know, it's important that you're not going, "Okay, sit down. You know, I need to tell you something. You drew that giraffe in 5 minutes." You know, like, that's super intense. Like, I don't want to hear that. You know, I don't want to be there for that.
I'm nearly here rolling away from you on the chair being like, "Please leave my giraffe alone."
Right, you feel it, right? So if it's like say for instance, you're going for a walk later on that evening, you could be like, "God, I noticed that you had a really fun time drawing that giraffe earlier and you spent so long on it, didn't you? How long do you think you spent it?" And you can have a conversation about it. And again, you're just pointing out the facts. You're not like sitting opposite them, like in a therapy session, lying on a couch, being super intense. You know, it's a little more nonchalant. It's a little bit more relaxed. It's like, "Oh yeah, let's just drop this into conversation." And it's not taking importance off it, but instead it's often easier for a child to digest it in that setting. Do you know? So it's, you know, even just the way you do it is useful as well.
I think it also gives an adult like a reason to be present there as well.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, you have to genuinely look at them to see what they're doing and to put that dialogue into your head to think of what you have to say as well. Yeah. Because it's just easy, like, oh, well done, we'll stick it on the fridge. Absolutely. And then you move on about your day.
Absolutely. You mightn't have even looked at the thing, you know. So, you know, part of that communication is that you're expressing to the child that you really were present. Like you said, that you're really paying attention, and what they are doing and what they have to show you or tell you is really important, and you want to know. That's what you're there for, you know.
Yeah. How long does it take to start seeing the results or the benefits of an art therapy session?
How long is a piece of string? No, it varies. It does. Like I will say, you know,
or you do blocks of 6 weeks, you said.
So I meet with parents every 6 sessions. Yeah, I will say usually by the 6th session, I find a child is comfortable enough to really go fully into the unconscious. Okay. But obviously, it's, you know, it's not a square peg round hole. It is a square peg round hole situation. Like everyone's different, do you know? So generally speaking, I suppose on average about 30 sessions I find in my work is pretty expected. And I'm obviously meeting them every week. So that can vary between holidays and things, between us doing, you know, 4 or 5 months of work or 12 months of work, just depending on how often they're coming. And then obviously it depends on the issues. I mean, with children that have had huge trauma or, you know, huge grief, it's often longer, you know. I think the longest I've worked with a child was 2 years, and that was in very extreme circumstances. And I still check in with them every now and again, like maybe every year or so they might come back for one more, because it's important that they feel like I'm going to be there for them, that they still have that resource when they need it. And, you know, I do express that to children, that if at any point when we're finished our work, they're welcome back, you know. And sometimes I find that children like to test that with their parents. Maybe a year on, they're like, I want to see Ella. And their parents will get in touch and I'll say, great. And they're kind of getting a bit worried that they're going to have to start the process again. I'm like, no, they just need to make sure that, again, they have autonomy.
Touch base. And
that they're being listened to, that when they're saying, I want to see Ella, you're going, okay, I'm going to take this seriously. And then they come and they know I'm still there. So it can feel like a real comfort zone, you know. But generally speaking, I don't work with children long term. I don't think that that's necessarily useful for the issues I have coming for me. I like to resolve it and build them up and send them on their way. You know, a child being with me for more than 2 years, I'm not doing my job, really. So, you know, I would describe it as short term work. Okay.
So you're also giving them the tools for them to keep and then go back to when they need them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And that varies for every child. But yeah, I suppose, you know, the way I like to work is that I want to get to the heart of the issue and resolve that for them and really work through it. And then build them back up and, give them some of the tools so that if just in case they go anywhere near any of the stuff that they were experiencing, that they are able to deal with it themselves, and that it's not this horrible, overwhelming, all-consuming thing again. That instead that they know that they're going to be okay through it, you know? Yeah.
You see art everywhere you go. Do you focus on the artistic side of things?
Do and I don't. Like, I think that I am an artistic person, and I think that because I was always kind of told that. Like, I come from quite an artistic family, but I was never amazing at, like, you know, things like life drawing and, you know, drawing things in front of you. That was never really my thing. Like, I would do it because you had to do it in school, right? You had to, like, you know, draw the girl sitting behind you, and you had to do your life drawing for your junior and leaving cert. You know, you were being graded on that, and I hated that. I remember hating that, and I still don't love that. But I suppose I love creativity in a lot of different forms. You know, I ended up studying ceramics, which is clay, because to be honest, I just like making a mess. I loved getting messy. And it was rare that I had the opportunity. So for 4 years, I got to make a mess and experiment. Amazing. And I loved it, and I found it so freeing. But I also found my art degree really restrictive, because it was all about the aesthetic. And when it came to being judged and graded, I really struggled with that because I thought I've put my heart into this. It's not about what you think it looks like or whether you like it or not, because I enjoyed it, you know. And I think, again, that's kind of led me towards art therapy. But I think with regards to seeing art everywhere, I think I see creativity everywhere. And like, obviously, you know, I'm working with children every day, that, you know, it's in everything. It's in absolutely everything. But I think even as adults, we are being creative in a lot of different ways, and we maybe just don't even realize it. Yeah. So I suppose I am seeing it in a lot of ways, but I think that a lot of people are. I think most people are. Maybe they're just not noticing it. Yeah.
And my question is, if there's any parents at home that are listening, they're like, ooh, I would like my child to encourage my child to be more creative, but they're a bit apprehensive, that they're like, I don't really want paint in my house. Or like, how could you encourage them to take that step to kind of start the process?
Yes. So do you mean if like the parent is apprehensive?
Yeah.
So firstly, I think that they need to kind of do a little bit of work themselves and kind of figure out where that's coming from and why they're feeling that way before they can kind of break down that walls. Because I don't, you know, it's not useful to put yourself in a situation where you're uncomfortable because you feel like it's best, because inevitably a child will pick up on it, right? Like, we don't need to say how we're feeling or what's going on, and our kids really know, because they're part of us, you know. They're very much a product of their environments. They're reading everything. So I think it's important for yourself to become as comfortable as possible, and you can do, you know, creative things that aren't hugely messy to begin with. You know, there's loads of, I mean, I keep seeing them all over Instagram stories and TikTok and stuff, and as much as I think there's so much misinformation on those things, there is some great activities that you can do with kiddies that are messy without being too much. You know, like, obviously you've probably seen online these like mud kitchens that you can get, where you set up a little kitchen outside and you put mud in a bowl and you make mud pies and stuff like that. I guess that's a relatively extreme version. And I think, you know, obviously there's people out there who would be concerned about germs and, you know, all sorts of different things. And I understand that if they're not comfortable, there's no point on expecting their children to be. So find a process that you are comfortable with. So I often say, to begin with parents, something like baking. Because, you know, it needs to be in a clean environment. You're going to eat it afterwards. And inevitably, we're cooking, generally speaking, every day, you know, most of the time. We plan to anyway. And baking is just a really easy thing to slide into from that. And it is creative. You know, you are making this little piece of art afterwards that you then get to consume, which is really exciting. And it can be messy. You know, but you can control that mess, and you can choose the ingredients that feel comfortable for you depending on what you're creating. So I think that's a good way. I know that sounds strange going into art, but I just think in a family setting around mess, start with something comfortable before you make your way to, you know, making slime. Or, you know, like even making Play-Doh is a really good one, and it can be so unmessy, and it's something I do in sessions all the time. And again, there's something really nice with the senses there, that you can also eat some of the Play-Doh. Do you know, if you're not making it with paint and you just make it with, you know, your flour, salt, oil and food colouring, it takes like 3 minutes to make. The kids really enjoy it. It's a really physical thing. And you can actually taste it and play with it and smell it. So you're doing so many different things there. And you're doing it with your child as well. So I think that's a really good place to start with creativity, and then kind of work your way up to some of the other things. You know, if paint is too much, then maybe start with crayon, you know, or then work your way up to chalk. Gets a little bit messier. And then when you feel ready, go for the paint. But it's not always a comfortable place for everyone. So I suppose just know your limitations and push yourself as much as is useful, because if you're pushing yourself too much again and you're uncomfortable, then your child is going to be uncomfortable.
How early can babies start doing art and messy play?
Oh my gosh, as soon as you're willing. Like, you know, I think that, say for instance you're weaning, and there's like, you know, all sorts of different weaning out there, the baby-led weaning, whatever it is, let them make a mess. I think that a really important part of any form of weaning is the sensory play and smushing it in their hands and on the table and on their face. And again, I think for a lot of parents that can be really uncomfortable. Like I know for myself when we started with my husband, he was kind of going, "Oh, just pick this up off the floor." I'm like, no, just leave it. I'm like, I'm trained in keeping calm. So, we've got this. It's fine. And I even find myself, I'm going, "Oh my God, no, don't throw that over there. Don't, please, no." And then you're going, "Okay, no, wait, this is me controlling the situation. I need to let this child make this
What are
mess."
the benefits of doing that? So why would I let them make a mess?
Well, why not?
Oh,
true.
But
there
also,
you go.
But also you have to consider, like, life can be a mess. Like, we make a mess as we go. And that's not just a physical, stuff on my face. That's like, not everything works out the way it's supposed to. And sometimes stuff's really sticky and difficult to get rid of. And it's important that we can be in that and find our way out of it. For instance, a child can make a mess and we can help them clean it up. That's what we're there for. So that they then know on a really basic level that then going forward, they can clean up a mess as well. So it's kind of a metaphor, really. And I think it's really important. And there's a lot of freedom in it as well. And again, I don't want to keep harping on about autonomy, but we all need it. And it's so important, and especially for a child to learn that they have autonomy, that they can make choices and decisions and that's okay and it goes okay. Or even if it doesn't work out the way they thought it would, that's okay as well. It's okay to make a little bit of a mess or, it's not going to harm us. It's all right. So that's kind of why I think it's important.
I never thought of it that way.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
How do you set limits then?
So it varies for everyone. Like obviously within my space, I have particular limits, but mine would be very different to what
safety,
you might have.
It's more down to safety.
Yeah, I think like safety is important. I mean, like breaking things, I only say that because like I can't glue everything together every week. And I do sometimes, and that's fine. And things get broken, and there's no shame in that. That's like, I break things. So I can't expect a 6-year-old not to break things. But I think deciding what your boundaries and your limits are as a parent or a teacher or whatever way you're coming into this, and making them quite clear, because for all children it's a comfort having a boundary. Knowing the limits and knowing that those boundaries will be held by whoever they're with is really comforting and important for a child. And you'll often find that the children are kind of seeking that, or they're really pushing the boundaries because they're making sure they're there. They're pushing those because they want to make sure that they're not going to break, that you're going to keep those boundaries. And that's really important as well. So deciding, on a really basic level, if you're doing something creative at home and it's a little messy and you're saying no paint hands on the white walls, that's a boundary. Like none on my beautiful white couch, or we're only going to do it in this room, or we have to keep it within this space. Sometimes I recommend to parents, if they're making a real mess, put a tarp down, and that can be your boundary if that feels comfortable. But express that. Don't expect a child to know boundaries without you expressing them, and also sticking to them yourselves. I think leading by example as an adult is the best thing you can do for a child. Don't expect them to do anything you're not willing to do, and don't break those boundaries yourself if you don't want them to. Do you know? Mm-hmm. So I think that's important too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just before we end, what's the one thing you want your child to learn or develop that's most important to you growing up?
Oh wow. Oh God, there's so many things. But I suppose if we're just focusing on creativity, I think that one thing I would want them to know is that creativity can be really useful and freeing, and it can just be for you. It doesn't need to be for anyone else. Just use it the way that you want to use it, and that's okay. I think that's important.
That's very important.
Yeah, I think so. Because you're sending really clear messages there. Again, a lot of that comes down to autonomy. You're taking the pressure off the aesthetic. It's not the person beside me is doing this. person over there is doing that
and how
better.
often we do that just to please others.
Exactly. So just doing it for the self. And you said earlier about like getting out your journal and doing a little bit of scribbling. Maybe it's important that that's just for you, that it doesn't need to be held up, it doesn't need to be put on Instagram, it doesn't need to be judged. You don't need to judge it. You can just do it. Just make that mess, and it's okay. The world's not going to end.
And that's really prioritizing yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it's within a safe environment and within boundaries. I'm not going to tell my child to go graffiti the most beautiful walls in Dublin. Like, obviously there'll be boundaries, but find your creativity and I think use that to your advantage, because we all have it. Even within play as children, that's being creative. So use that as much as you can.
Yeah,
don't forget about it.
Love it. Thank you so much, Ella.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you'd like to share your own story on our podcast, please get in touch through our social media. Don't forget to like, share and follow so you'll never miss out on upcoming episodes. See you next time!